Welcome to the Bible and Science. This is Dave Prentice. I'm a retired public high school teacher, certified in all branches of science and math. I've also taught on the Bible and Science for many years, both in the U.S. and on many overseas mission trips. This is episode 44 of the Bible and Science. We've been talking about dinosaurs, and so here's some questions. Did dinosaurs evolve into birds? You hear that all the time, all over the place now. Well, also, where did mammals come from? What about the other reptiles, the flying and the marine reptiles? Where did they come from? Did they all come from dinosaurs? Let me just review very quickly. There are hundreds and hundreds of types of dinosaurs that have been named, which may be a little bit excessive on the number of names, but regardless, every single type of dinosaur appears in the fossil record suddenly and fully formed with nothing leading up to it. All of its identifying characteristics are intact. And when we go to lower to upper layer, if there's some type of dinosaur that is found in more than one layer, the last representatives of each type, that is those at the highest level, are easily recognizable as the same type as the first. Evolution is nowhere to be seen. What we have is a bunch of distinct types of dinosaurs. So here's another question that is commonly presented, that birds evolved from dinosaurs. Birds are nothing but feathered dinosaurs. Okay, what are the arguments for dinosaurs evolving into birds? There were two dinosaur orders, Ornithischia and Saurischia. Ornithischia had a pelvis that was pretty similar to that of birds. And then there were also several dinosaurs, such as Gallimimus, Ornithomimus, and Struthiomimus, had an overall shape something like an ostrich. So there's a Gallimimus and a Struthiomimus and an Archaeopteryx on the page there. Okay, Archaeopteryx, which was a Triassic fossil bird, had some feathers that are often, or some features that are often found in reptiles. And there have been some recent dinosaur discoveries that are alleged to have shown indications of feathers. Well, birds are here. They must have evolved from somewhere, right? If you believe in evolution, I don't believe that. I believe they were designed, but they must have evolved from somewhere, and there are no other types of animals that could have been ancestors of them except the dinosaurs. Well, are there any problems with that? First of all, Archaeopteryx was long supposed to be the oldest bird, but in 1986, Sankar Chatterjee of Texas Tech discovered the fossils of crow-sized birds in Upper Triassic deposits in Texas. He named them Protoavis. These rocks are dated to the Upper Triassic, which is the same level as the earliest dinosaurs. So if birds evolved from dinosaurs, we have a problem with the timing. The Protoavis was there along with the earliest dinosaurs, not the latest. They appear in the same strata as the first theropod dinosaurs. They're dated millions of years earlier than any of those bird-like dinosaurs like Struthiomimus and Ornithomimus. Are there any good, valid scientific arguments against dinosaur to bird evolution? Yes, there are. Birds, of course, have what kind of pelvis? A bird-type pelvis. The ilium is on top, as you'll see in the diagram. The pubis and ischium point backwards. Well, the dinosaurs of order Ornithischia had a similar pelvis, but they are not considered to be the ancestors of birds. Too many other differences. So the bird-type pelvis is supposed to have evolved two separate times, independently. Once in birds, and the other in the dinosaur order Ornithischia. Okay, the other dinosaur order, Saurischia, it included dinosaurs with a lizard-type pelvis. The ilium was on top, and the pubis was pointing frontward, and the ischium pointed backwards. They have the wrong type of pelvis, but The theropods, which is a subgroup of saurischians, are considered to be the ancestors of birds. The ornithischians have too many dissimilarities, so they couldn't be the ancestors, but the saurischians, which have totally different internal structure, they are supposed to be the ancestor. Okay, so the first common ancestor of ornithischians and birds would have begun with a lizard-type pelvis, a saurischian pelvis. It would have experienced a tremendous number of mutations in its DNA in order to evolve into the bird-hipped dinosaurs, ornithischian. But meanwhile, some unknown type of theropod dinosaur would have had to independently acquire the same mutations to produce the different hips as found in birds. So as the pelvises are changing, the internal structure of the animal is changing also. So it started out with a reptile type pelvis, and then it had to evolve into a bird type pelvis. Well, as all of this was happening, the animals would still need to be able to walk. So picture your pelvis changing over hundreds or thousands of generations, and picture all of the intermediates trying to walk. It's just not reasonable. Also, here's some other arguments against dinosaur to bird evolution. There are quite a number of differences between reptiles and birds, major anatomical differences. One of them is the breathing mechanism. Birds have tube-type lungs as compared to the sacs on mammals and reptiles. The lungs in birds don't exchange gases with the blood. That happens in air capillaries throughout the body. And as far as we know, all birds are warm-blooded. Birds, if you ever call somebody a bird brain, you've just given them a compliment. Birds have a highly developed cerebellum and cerebral hemisphere to coordinate fine motor activities, such as the position of each individual feather. And when birds flap their wings, that's the opposite motion from walking and grasping. People have said that perhaps the ancestors of the birds were trying to catch insects, so they would flap their wings to trap the insects in between. Well, the problem is that one of many problems is that that would blow the insects out of the way if they had their feathers. But then the motion, when you're flapping as opposed to walking and grasping, the motion is the opposite direction. And of course, all known birds have feathers. Feathers are not just some sort of frayed scales. I had the privilege of meeting Dr. Jerry Bergman, who wrote an interesting article, The Evolution of Feathers, a Major Problem for Darwinism. Also, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a website called the Feather Atlas. Well, it's not just one type of feather. There are at least 12 types of feathers known. Down feathers, which are used for insulation, powder down feathers, insulate, and filoplume feathers used for decoration, and bristle feathers. There are two types of remiges, which are the strong feathers used in fast-powered flight. There are also soft ones like those used by owls for slow silent flight, and then the flight feathers of the tail, the rectrices, and then the innermost flight feathers on the wings, the tertials. There are highly specialized structures. They're not just frayed scales. And why are they there? Because the DNA has the instruction to put them there. Why would anything evolve? Every living thing gets its physical characteristics, that is, its phenotype, from the information in its DNA, that is, its genotype. Mutations are random copying mistakes during DNA reproduction. So in order for anything to evolve, there would have to be a series of many, many, many beneficial mutations, perhaps millions, despite the multiple layers of error correcting during cell reproduction, which we've gone into before in an earlier lesson. But these mutations would have to build up in the DNA generation after generation. Each one became the source of the next generation, and eventually the mutations would be the source of new structures, the bones, the eyes, the wings, the feathers, and so forth. So let's go back to the question of whether Archaeopteryx is the ancestor of all birds. There are some certain physical features about it that drew attention, and maybe they're not quite so significant. Number one, it had a long bony tail. Well, so do swans. Number two, it had claws on its wings. Ostriches do, and they're alive, and also hoatzins and turacos, which are extinct birds. Yeah, they had claws too. It had teeth. Okay, so the two undisputed fossil birds, Hesperornis and Ichthyornis. So is having teeth an indication of primitiveness? In that case, I must be primitive because I still have my teeth. So as I get older and lose my teeth, I guess I'm going to become more advanced. No, that's ridiculous. It had a shallow breastbone. So does the hoatzin, which is a living bird. It had hollow bones, which we know by MRIs and things like that. It had hollow bones that are typical of all birds. It also had feathers, one of the many different types, or all of the many different types, typical of all birds. And then since its discovery, there have been other true birds, such as the one I showed you, Protoavis, or I'm about to show you. They've been found in rocks dated even older. So Archaeopteryx is dated to the Upper Jurassic, supposedly about 225 million years ago. But then in 1986, Sankar Chatterjee of Texas Tech discovered the fossils of crow-sized birds in Upper Triassic deposits in Texas. He named them Protoavis. The rocks containing these are dated 75 million years older than those in which Archaeopteryx is found. It would be tough to be the descendants if you're 75 million years older. They appear in the same strata as the first theropods and millions of years earlier than the first bird-like dinosaurs. So, is Archaeopteryx the ancestor of all birds? According to evolutionists, it would be. Yeah, the problem is one of many problems. There are over 2,800 genera of birds living in the world today. They're divided into over 10,000 species. All of them came from one common ancestor, supposedly. They range from ostriches to cassowaries, eagles, owls, hummingbirds, penguins, finches, pelicans, ducks, woodpeckers, thousands of other living forms, as well as some extinct forms, such as the huge terror bird, Diatryma. So Archaeopteryx, or any other ancient animal that was the ancestor, would have needed an unimaginable amount of genetic information to be the ancestor of all of these types. And of course, there are no known intermediates in between. Seems to me a reasonable person could look at this and say, you know, this could be an indication of design. Were there feathered dinosaurs? Well, there have been some recent reports that said some dinosaurs may have had feathers. The supposed feather impressions are so faint that many are skeptical that they're really feathers. But what if they really did have feathers? The reports don't describe which of the 12 types of feathers that I referred to previously that they're supposed to have been. We've also assumed that only birds have feathers. Well, we usually assume that only reptiles, amphibians, fish, and birds lay eggs. Yeah, but there are some mammals that lay eggs. And even if some reptiles did have feathers, it wouldn't mean a thing. Unlike any other mammal, the platypus has poison glands. Well, wait a minute. I thought only snakes and other things like that. No. But then also, unlike any other animal known, it nurses its young through hollow hairs. And then we usually assume that all fish are cold-blooded, that is, match the temperature of their surroundings, but the great white shark can regulate its temperature to a certain extent at least. So having an unusual feature has nothing to do with evolution. So to summarize, each major type of fossil, whether it's mammal, reptile, bird, whatever, appears in the fossil record suddenly and fully formed, with all of its identifying characteristics, its ordinal characters, already present. And out of hundreds of thousands of fossil species, there have only been a few dozen proposed as possible transitions from one major type to another. Even those are in dispute among paleontologists. They're not universally accepted. So to recap some things from earlier, there's no clear evidence showing how fish might have evolved into amphibians, how the first dinosaurs might have evolved, how any type of dinosaurs found in one fossil suite might have evolved into a different type found in a different fossil suite, or how some sort of dinosaur might have evolved into some type of bird. Well, dinosaurs, of course, are not the only reptiles. Genesis 1 says 10 times that God created every living thing to reproduce according to its kind or after its kind, depending on your translation. So if the Bible really is from Almighty God, super intelligent God, that would mean, if he's telling the truth, which I accept, it rules out the possibility of evolution from one major kind to another among both plants and animals. By contrast, evolution says every major kind evolved from a different major kind. One-celled organisms supposed to have come from lifeless chemicals, multi-celled from one-celled, invertebrates from lower organisms, vertebrates from invertebrates, amphibians from fish, reptiles from amphibians, and dinosaurs and many other types, such as the mammal-like reptiles or pelycosaurs. The marine reptiles, flying reptiles, are supposed to have all come from stem reptiles, birds from reptiles, mammals from reptiles, and so on. So if evolution is right, the Bible is wrong. But if the Bible is right, evolution is wrong. There are several types of things that are supposed to have evolved from dinosaurs. A lot of people mistakenly call the ichthyosaurs and the sauropterygians marine dinosaurs. No, they were not dinosaurs. There were several different orders besides the two orders of dinosaurs. So ichthyosaurs, which were found in Triassic through Cretaceous, they included very fish-like forms, but no one believes they were a transition from fish to reptiles. Instead, somehow the DNA of their ancestors evolved to give them legs, get rid of the fins, give them legs, and then they came out of the sea and onto the land, and then later their DNA evolved the other way. They lost the legs they had gained, and they evolved fins again as they went back into the sea. Okay, if you want to believe that, that's fine. It's not a whole lot of evidence for it. But then also, there were the sauropterygians, and this would be sort of like the way we imagine the Loch Ness Monster, if it really is real. They had fat bodies, short paddle-shaped limbs. Now, they were pretty good size. And then also, there was the order Squamosa, which is the mosasaur. If you saw one of the Jurassic Park movies where a very large creature jumped out from the water and snatched up something in its jaws, that would be a mosasaur. They could be up to 50 feet long, the largest specimen we found. It doesn't mean there weren't any bigger than that, but that's the largest we've found so far. Also, a lot of people call these flying dinosaurs. They were not dinosaurs either. The flying reptiles were not dinosaurs, but they're supposed to have died out at the same time. The first ones, like everything else, appear in the fossil record suddenly and fully formed with no known ancestry. They belong to an order called Pterosauria, which is divided into two suborders. The rhamphorhynchoids had long tails. For instance, Rhamphorhynchus down there at the lower left. And the other ones, the pterodactyloids, had short tails. Like you'll see a Quetzalcoatlus at the upper right and a Pteranodon in the center. Okay, and Pterodactylus, there's no trace of one evolving from the other or evolving from dinosaurs or anything like that. So this would be a typical cladogram showing how fish might have evolved eventually into mammals, which is our next major topic, mammals. Well, the ancestral fish would have been jawless, and then they would have gone through a stage where their skeleton was composed of cartilage, and eventually it turned into bone, and then you had things like the coelacanths and a lungfish. Notice how many transitions are shown on there. None. You don't need a single transition to put together a cladogram like this. So when you get down to the amphibians, remember we've talked about this before, one of the main differences between amphibians and reptiles is the type of egg. An amphibian has a very simple egg. It's gelatinous and it's only got a few divisions. A reptile egg is leathery or hard shelled, and it's got many more divisions, over twice as many. So somebody has to figure out a way in order for the amphibian that breeds externally to decide to evolve into a reptile that breeds internally. It's got to invent the reptilian egg, and then it's got to change its behavior as far as its method of breeding. And then the amniotes, which are the ones that have either a leathery or a hard shell on their eggs, are supposed to be the ancestors of us humans and all of the other kinds of mammals. So with mammals, which is going to be our next topic, we'll talk about the monotremes, the marsupials, the placental mammals. But let me just show you a few contrasts between reptiles and mammals. Reptiles don't nurse. They essentially abandon their young, where mammals exhibit maternal behavior, very elaborate. Baby reptiles hatch as miniature versions of the adults. Baby mammals are much different in shape and characteristics from adults. And until they're weaned, they can't eat the same food as adults, where baby reptiles are just miniature versions of the adults. Reptiles match the temperature of their surroundings, and mammals maintain a constant body temperature. No known living reptiles have hair. All known mammals have hair. The only reptiles known that have anything like a diaphragm are the crocodilians, crocodiles and so forth. They move their pelvises in order to draw in air. Mammals breathe by pulling their diaphragm down to create negative pressure and draw air into the lungs. And then we're going to focus a lot on this. Reptiles have 3 bones on each side of the lower jaw, only 1 bone in the middle ear. Mammals, by contrast, have 1 bone on each side of the lower jaw and 3 bones in the middle ear. So how would this have happened? According to evolution, these things would have had to evolve by random mutations in DNA. Okay, so to repeat some of the characteristics of mammals versus reptiles. Mammal-like reptiles, pelycosaurs, were still reptiles. There are millions of fossils of this kind of thing found around the world, especially in Permian rocks. But how mammal-like are they really? Well, all known mammals have a single bone on each side of the lower jaw, 3 ear bones on each side. All known reptiles, by contrast, have 3 bones on each side of the lower jaw and a single ear bone on each side, even the mammal-like reptiles. All mammals have a structure called an organ of Corti to process hearing. There are no reptiles known that have such a structure. And then all mammals use a diaphragm to breathe. There are no reptiles that have such a structure. The only ones that have anything like it are crocodilians, which move their hips to allow air to come in, but they don't have a diaphragm. Mammal and reptile eyes are placed differently. Reptiles match the temperature of their surroundings, that is, they're cold-blooded. All mammals are warm-blooded. All known reptiles have scales. Mammals have hair instead. Baby reptiles are miniature versions of adults, and they can immediately eat an adult diet. This is not the case with baby mammals. They have to nurse. The females produce milk. The mother does. And reptiles grow as long as they live. Mammals reach a maximum size and stop growing. Okay, if you've been watching any of my videos, you realize that I'm a biblical creationist and I believe the earth is the way the Bible describes it. So this material is written from a young earth perspective. But I'm going to be referring to the standard geologic timescales to show that even if the earth were extremely old, evolution is nowhere to be seen in the fossil record. Evolutionary thought would lead us to believe that fish should have evolved to amphibians, which then turned into some transitional form leading to reptiles despite the discrepancy between egg types and breeding methods. And then these reptiles should have evolved into what we call stem reptiles, then the more advanced ones, like perhaps including dinosaurs, and then the most advanced mammal-like reptiles, and then mammals, which are considered more advanced than any of those. Well, here's the problem. The mammal-like reptiles, which are most similar to mammals, should be the most highly evolved. Therefore, we should find them up in the highest rock layers. Well, that's supposed to be more recent. That's not what we find. The mammal-like reptiles, such as the pelycosaurs, are first found in lower strata than dinosaurs. That is, they would be much, much earlier than the dinosaurs, far out of sequence. So if we look at reptiles and mammals on the geologic timescale, you'll see that the first reptile, Hylonomus, is somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 to 325 million years ago, according to evolutionary scales. And then the mammal-like reptiles would have been there 300 million to maybe 280, 275 million years, something like that, perhaps as recently as 255. But then the first mammals are brachylodons. They're believed to be the oldest mammals. Now look at the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs didn't come along until after Brachylodon was there, a mammal. So we have a problem. The reptiles should have appeared before the mammals, but the mammals appeared before the dinosaurs. This is a problem. Well, in the next few episodes, we're going to be talking an awful lot about mammals, transitions to mammals, the various types of mammals that there are in the fossil record and in the world today. And I would hope that you would come to agree with me that, no, there's no evolution in the fossil record.